Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We can to our topic. We obviously dedicate, as usual, the learning of the Amud today to the Refuah Shelema Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, Michael Ben Nahid, Rabbi Avraham ben Tajgol, should all have Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem B'tach Sha'ar Cholei Yisrael. Amud also is dedicated. I think today is the yahrzeit of my uncle, Rabbi Shalom Yaakov ben Shlomo. So Shabbat should have an adiyah. These months, learning of the community has been dedicated by Shea family, Cohen family, and Dayan family. Should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot. Amen. So we learned two very peculiar, powerful Gemaras about Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, and we went back to explain one of them in the name of Chizkiah Rabbi Yirmiyah Mishum Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli. Yachol ani liftor et kol ha'olam kulo min adin. Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli says, I could take on the way Rashi understands it, the averot of the entire world, from the day that I was created until today. Everyone that does anything wrong, I could take it on that they should be patur from the din. The way Rashi understands it is the Kedushav Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli and the difficulties that he endured in his life would be sufficient to take that on in a way that people would be patur. Bizchuti ani sovel kol avonotehem. It's the language of Rashi. Upotran minadin. Many other Mefashim understand this as being the sar shel hame'ara. Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli did not deserve Yisurim in that way. It's like the Gemara Masechet Succah Daf Hey, that Yisurim, when they're not deserved, is not kaparat avorot, but is the Yisurim shel ahava, and that the Ramchal explains that it could be people who are connected with a tzaddik, and he cares about them in such way that his connection with them could be an atonement when he suffers a little bit, and that is considered like a lot because of his closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That could be considered a lot, equivalent of a lot of suffering for the people. Now imagine that in a mega level for Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, and again we have many things mentioned in Divrei HaTanaim VaAmuraim, Midrashim, and the Gemarot about Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli that you don't find necessarily elsewhere, some of which we will Be'ezrat Hashem discuss today. But this is certainly one of those, very powerful, out of ordinary words of the Gemara that Rabbi Shlomo says, "Yachol ani liftor et kol ha'olam kulo min adin, miyom shenivreti ad ata." From the day that I was born until today, I could patter up the whole world from din. Ve'ilmale Elazar beni imi. If the only other person that was there with him in the Ma'ara was Elazar Rabbi Shimon, right? We spoke about the story of Masechet Shabbat Daf Lamed Gimel. He spoke up against the Romans. He did not want to be politically correct, so to speak, in the conversation that they had with their friends. And that conversation soon leaked, as conversations always do. And the Romans had off with his head. Basically, he was sentenced to death. He had to run away with his son, and they stayed in a cave learning with Eliyahu Hanavi for 12 years. They came out. Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli and his son had grown intolerant of anyone that does anything besides learning Torah. How can you? Manichin chaye olam ve'oskim b'chaye sha'ah was the expression that they had. How can you leave learning Torah when you have the opportunity and do business, do other things, like be involved in the world? And obviously the Batkol, the heavenly voice, comes out to say, I didn't send you here to destroy my world and be intolerant. Go back to your Ma'ara. Another year of staying in Ma'ara kind of did it for Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, did not cut it for Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar still was intolerant when they came out, but Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli had become more accepting of the world the way it is, and it became more of a healing element, not a destructive. But again, that's the level of Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli that we are speaking over here. And says the Gemara, if Yotam ben Uziyahu would be with us, the three of us, Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, Rabbi Elazar Beno, and Yotam ben Uziyahu, the king, which again Rashi over here says, because of the tremendous anivut, the magnificent humility that he displayed when being the king, not acting like one, because of the kivud avayim, the respect and the reverence that he had for his father who was sick. He was inflicted by tzarat, and he had to stay away, and yet Yotam ben Uziyahu humbly would do everything that the king does, plus, and he would sign his father's name on everything, as though he doesn't exist even. And that humility, and we mentioned before that Sefer Hasidim, others, they write that these three people are people who never accepted any of their credits in this world, so therefore they could be a source of atonement for the whole world. So therefore Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli says, if Yotam ben Uziyahu would join us, the zchuyot of us three combined would patter up the world, miyom shenivra ha'olam, and until the end of all generations at Sofa. So that's one ma'amar of the Gemara that we learned together, which was very powerful. And the second one is just following up on that. You think this is interesting? Listen to this. I saw the people who are considered Bnei Aliyah, the higher up people, in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vehen muatin. They are not a lot of them. Not a lot of them. And says Rashi, Ro'eh ani lefi ma'aseh habriyot bnei aliyah kat hamekabelin pnei shechina. That's how he explains it. The people who are going to be mekabel pnei shechina, there are not a lot of them. Im elef, and then he says the interesting part. If they are 1,000 in this generation, me and my son are part of it, says Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli. Ani ubeni mehem, im me'ahem, if there are 100, ani ubeni mehem, me and my son Elazar are part of them. Im shenayim hen, if there's only 2 people, ani ubeni hen, it's only me and my son. In other words, I know that me and my son are that Bnei Aliyah. Who else it is? Not sure. Not a lot of people, right? And this is Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli saying it about himself, right? And the Gemara, just derech aga, before we even come back to digest, for lack of a better term, a presumptuous sounding sentence from Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli and see what other people said about Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli. Let's see the words of the Gemara following up, just asking a question. Says Gemara, is it really that little? Ve'amar Rava, Tamni Sari Alfi Dara Hava Kamek Chabrichu says 18,000 in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every generation. Shenemar Saviv Shemona Asar Elif. That says around HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Shemona Asar Elif. 18,000. Well, says no. Look, Kasha. One is level of people who gaze and understand Hakadosh Baruch Hu in a clear lens, so to speak. And the other ones are not through a clear lens. So this whole Aspaklaria Hamira really comes from the Gemara. The Gemara says it right over here. So in other words, you have 18,000 people that are close up, but they are not a clear lens. The understanding that they have from HaKadosh Baruch Hu being Mekabel P'Shechina is not in a clear lens. And then there's other people who the Gemara, Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, called Bnei Aliyah, and those are a higher level, and it's few of them. It could be only 2, it could be only 100, it could be only 1,000. They're not 18,000.
In every generation? Or
it's seemingly every generation, yes. So says the Gemara. Now you'll see very soon, right? So he said, Gemara said, fine, but mi zutri kulehai, still, can it only be 2 people? V'hamar Abaye. Abaye says, lo pachot alma mitlatin v'shita tzadiki demekabel yapeh shechina b'chol yom. Can't be less than 36 tzadikim who accept pnei shechina every single day. The number of lamed vav tzadikim comes actually from this Gemara. Now, people, it has evolved that this is tzadikim nistarim, hidden tzadikim. Well, really, the whole concept of tzadikim is always nistarim, because Adam yireh le'enayim, Hashem yireh la'levav. A person judges with what they see, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu watches the hearts of people. Only Hashem is the judge of the hearts. So me and you never would know really who is and who is not going to be part of those. We certainly would not know who is not part of those. Therefore, the concept of tzaddikim ought to be something that is hidden in that way. But nevertheless, 36 hidden, not hidden, but 36 tzaddikim in every generation, says Abaye, that accept Pnei Shechina every single day. So you telling me that Bnei Aliyah are accepting the Pnei Shechina could be only 2. Abaye said, we learned that it can't be less than 36. The world stands on these people. Shenemar, as it says, Ashrei kol chochelo. Fortunate is everyone that awaits him, yearns for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo is Lamed Vav. Lamed Vav is 36 tzaddikim. It's actually interesting that the way it is depicted in the pasuk is Ashrei kol chochelo, people who yearn for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? That's the barometer in that way of waiting for Hashem's Yeshua, waiting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, connecting with Hashem in that way. Lo begimatria telatin v'shitavu. That's 36. The Gemara answers, Lo kasha, hade'ayli bebar, hade'ayli belobar. Some of them need reshut, need permission to get in, so to speak, to that close relationship, and some could go and come without permission. That's a higher level. So Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli was talking about that highest level of aspaklaria ha-meira, the clear lens and close up that they don't even need the reshut, the permission to go in and out. So that is the level of Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli. By the way, the Maharsha actually asks. The Maharsha asks that it sounds from over here that the people who have the zchut of aspaklari ha-meira, they are not less than 36, right? So the Gemara says, like black and white, clearly. And the Gemara Masechet Yevamot, and Daf Mem Tet Amud Bet, says that only Moshe Rabbeinu had aspaklari ha-meira. Now we generally speaking are accustomed to saying that Moshe Rabbeinu was aspaklari ha-meira, and that's the difference of the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu with the nevuah of anybody else. That's how we perceive it, and that's what the Maharsha asks. It seemingly is a stira between the two Gemaras. There the Gemara seems to indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu is the only one with aspaklari ha-meira, and over here the Gemara says we have at least 36 people in every single generation. Now add up the generations, and also in the Sfarim is not so clear what is considered a generation, right? How do you count the generations, right? Without getting into the details of that, but every generation has 36. There's 36 constant tzaddikim that are there. Now I would imagine that you have no less than 36. Then the generation is really dor holech v'dor ba. Every one of those that dies, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has already thought of replacing those with another one. Ad shelo shaka shimsho shel Eli, zarach shimsho shel Shmuel. The Gemara tells us that before the sun, so to speak, the source of light of Eli HaKohen dimmed, and it was like a sunset, the son of Shmuel, the light of Shmuel Hanavi, already became bright and clear to the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu worries for clearing that up. But nevertheless, out of all the generations, only Moshe Rabbeinu, that's the Gemara in Memtet in Masechet Yevamot. So you see that it is much more than just that one thing. And Marsha answers what he answers. He basically says that the Gemara over there is talking about the Nevi'im, here we're talking about Tzadikim. But which is the simple answer. We're not talking about people who have Nevuah. Nowadays, we don't have Nevuah. The Gemara says that in Bayit Sheni, already they didn't have Nevuah. Nevuah did not exist in Bayit Sheni, only in Bayit Rishon. We were missing 5 elements of Kedusha in Bayit Sheni. One of them is Nevuah. Nevuah we didn't have. So when we talk about Moshe Rabbeinu, we're talking about that level. I would just add maybe to what the Maharsha writes, the Vinagaon in his Perush on Yeshayahu in the very beginning, because Yeshaya is, you're talking about Nevi'im Rishonim versus Nevi'im Acharonim, so that's a good place that the Vinagaon puts it there, that within the levels of Nevuah, we have Aspaklaria HaMeira for Nevi'im Arishonim, and you have Aspaklaria She'ena Meira, but even with, and that's Nevi'im Acharonim, but when we talk about Moshe Rabbeinu is Aspaklaria HaMeira Shebe'meira. In other words, the Vilna says there are 2 levels. Even there, you have Moshe Rabbeinu's level, which is Aspaklaria HaMeira Shebe'meira, and then you have the Nevi'im Rishonim, and then you have the Nevi'im Acharonim. So not all Nevi'im are created equally either, but nevertheless, we stick to what the Maharsha says over here to understand our Gemara. Now, obviously, this is a Gemara, Eno Omer Ela Dorsheni. These are words that the Gemara never ever says about any of the other Tanaim, to equate them with that level that they could take on the entire world with them and their son together with Yotam ben Uziyahu, or to say that if there are 2 people on top, it's going to be me and my son. That is obviously a tremendous. So we spoke about this a little bit yesterday, how Maran Bet Yosef asks and answers this without explanation in Yoredah Siman Memtet. There, the Bet Yosef asks, and Machloket really, what he's dealing with is Machloket of Rambam and Rosh in the halachot of Gidan Hashem, where we're discussing whether or not Gidan Hashem is Asur B'Hana'ah or is it only Asur B'Achila. The Gemara in Masechet Chulin says, En Begidim Benoten Ta'am, the sinews don't have any taste. Says, and yet the Torah has answered the Gidan Hashem. This is Rabbah in Perek Chet, Halacha Yudalet of Ilchot B'Acharot Asurot, that says it's Mutar B'Hana'ah, and the Rosh in the beginning of the 7th Perek, in the Perek Gidan Hashem in Masechet Chulin, he brings in the name of Chachmei Lunil, as we said yesterday, that they ask a question on the Rambam that the Enri Gidim Benot and Tam, and they say that it should be Asur B'Hana'ah, and Maran Bet Yosef really deals with this in as we mentioned in Yoredah, in Siman Peitet, in the halachot of Gidan Hashem, and he pushes away the words of the Rosh. He explains the Rambam in a completely different way than the Rosh had understood it, and then he says at the end, and I have the quotation of the Bet Yosef here. He says, "Umiu beSefer Zohar Parashat Vayishlach nireh shagid asur b'hana'ah." He brings the Gidan Hashem in Zohar is said to be asur b'hana'ah, which is a machloket Tanaim between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the one that says it is asur b'hana'ah, and therefore says the Bet Yosef v'lachen tov lizaher. Therefore, you should try to be careful that it will be asur b'hana'ah. Now, this obviously would pose a question on selling Gidan Hashem, selling the hind quarter of an animal. Again, without getting into nowadays and what the minhag of the slaughterhouses are and kashrut agencies are in today's generation. But nevertheless, the Bet Yosef says because of Zohar, the Chachmei Lunil perhaps had the Zohar, and that's why they answered it. And not only that, we should be try to be careful. So says the Ramah, Dr. Moshe, in Ot Yud Bet, on his comments on the Bet Yosef. He says, I don't get it, I don't understand. The Bet Yosef, at the end, Lemasa is Machmir, like this Shita. The Shita of Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai. Kedat Zohar, the Gidar Rasha Asur Ba'ana. And this is what the Ramah writes, and I quote, Ve'eni mevin devarav, I don't understand it. Kishamati ki ba'Sefer HaZohar, I heard, it wasn't clear apparently who was. And we spoke about in speaking of the authenticity of the Zohar HaKadosh, we spoke about the author and the problems that arose at the time about the author or authors of Sefer Zohar HaKadosh. But says the Ramah Shamati ki bar Sefer HaZohar who stam Rabbi Shimon hamuskar betalmud, is what we call Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai in the Gemara. Shehu Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai vehu palik betalmud shelanu im Rabbi Yehuda shmatir ba'ana'ah. It's machloket Tanaim for Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon halacha Rabbi Yehuda. We have this already in Masechet Eruvin Daf Memvav as Klalei Hashas that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon halacha Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says it like explicitly, black and white. So it says the Ramah ve'im ken ech ra'a misefer Zohar linyan halchata. So what does that add? That you find something in Zohar HaKadosh, right? So the same problem. And then he adds, he says, not only that, so even Bet Yosef himself writes this in earlier on in Siman Nun Chet in Sefer Orach Without getting into that, we mentioned that the Divrei Yoel, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rav, Zechutu Yogan Alayni, he says in his Sefer on Parshat Vayeshev that the difference is before Sa'ar Me'ara and after Sa'ar Me'ara. It says Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai, before he went to the cave, yeah, he was, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. But after he came back, everything halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, finding Zohar HaKadosh that he wrote, he authored afterwards, that would be a raya, that would be a proof that you have halacha ke Rabbi Shimon versus Rabbi Yehuda. That's what he writes. And we mentioned that the Gemara kind of like indicates that in Masechet Shabbat After Begima, saying that before he went, he would ask his questions to Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, his father-in-law. He would answer him 12 answers. After he came back, not only he didn't have any questions for his father-in-law, but now the father-in-law was the one asking him the questions, and he would answer not 1, not 12, but 24 answers on every question Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair had. So you clearly see that Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai had been completely altered to a much higher level. And we also mentioned that the Baal Tanya writes that this was not just that he learned Nistar, but he learned Nikla. In Shas Uposkim he was bigger, as it's indicated in the Gemara over there as well. Now there are multiple things about Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai that are said that you don't find necessarily about the other Tanaim and Amoraim. For instance, I put a few of them over here that I'll read to you. The Midrash Rabbah in Shir Hashirim says, "Maaseh be'isha achat b'sidan shesha'atayim ba'ala 10 shanim v'lo yalada." As a woman that 10 years, the halacha in the beginning of an Ezer is that a person that lives with their wife 10 years without children. Again, nowadays the minhag is not like that, as the Bet Yosef explains, but you would divorce and get married again. So they couldn't have children. And the husband, like the halacha is, we learned this from Avraham Avinu, wanted to divorce her and get married again to have children. The mitzvah priya v'rivya. They were very, in a good relationship, and it was very hard for them. They loved each other. They went to Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai. Amad ve'itparal alehem ve'nifkedu. He davened and they had children. Right? So it's a simple one to start with. Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, this is a Gemara straight up in Masechet Ketuvot that says the story in Daf Zayin Amud Bet. Rabbi Shimon ben Levi came to Gan Eden and saw Rabbi Shlomo Bar Yochai, says the Gemara, Yoshev berosh merobeh shlosha asle kisot asuyot mipaz, and he was sitting the top head of the 13 rows of the benches made from pure gold, mipaz vesharlo hanirat hakeshet bi'amecha. And Rav Shlomo Yisraeli said, did you have a rainbow show up in your generations, right? Because the Gemara there says that Rav Shlomo Yisraeli, his entire life, there was no show of a natural phenomena of a keshet, of a rainbow. What does that mean? Because as the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Chod Brachot, when you see a rainbow, you must say a bracha. The Gemara says this in the 9th perk of Masechet Brachot. And in the bracha is, the Hashem is ne'eman b'brito v'kayom b'ma'amaro. The Hashem promised that when he gets angry, he's not going to destroy the world. He's just going to show a sign of keshet. That's why it's not an appropriate thing. The Mishnah says when you see a keshet, you should not say to your friends, "Oh, look at keshet," because it's a display of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's being displeased with the world, so to speak. And that's not something that you want to look. It's the kavod of Hakadosh Baruch Hu that's showing in keshet. So Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, in his whole life, you see our Gemara in Sukkah daf memei Amud Bet, but there is the second piece of it in Masechet Succah daf ayin zayin Amud Bet, that he, not only he could have, should have, would have patterned up the world from din, and we mentioned the Ben Ish Chai asks why he didn't, and he says that Hakadosh Baruch Hu didn't want that to happen, but nevertheless, that element he had, Hashem never got angry with his generation, so long as he was alive, to the degree that a keshet, a rainbow, would be a necessity. So that's another thing that you don't find about any of the other Tana'i where I'm in that way. The Gemara, again, checks him against Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and this is a Yerushalmi. The Gemara in Ketuvot indicates this, but Yerushalmi in that Gemara that we spoke about in Perek Tet about the bracha and rainbows, actually says it. The Yerushalmi in Masechet Brachot Perek Tet says that Halacha Bet that in the entire lifetime of Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli you had no keshet showing up, right? Yeah.
Wasn't there tremendous persecution and they were killing the Tanaim, the Romans and stuff? So it wasn't such a peaceful time period. I mean, there wasn't a keshet, but it was tremendous persecution and
But people also died. Things happen still. Things in the world happen, but this was one sign of having a tzaddik in your generation in that very special way. The Gemara also says, before that, the Midrash Rabbah says something amazing, and this is in Shemot Rabbah, that a student of Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli wanted to leave learning, leave kollel, and go become a doctor, right, or a lawyer. I don't know what he wanted to be. He wanted to go work. He wanted money, right? So Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, takes him to a bik'ah. He takes him to a valley, and the language of the the Midrash Rabbah goes. It says bik'ah hitmalei bedinarei zahav. Bik'ah, valley, become filled with golden coins. And I don't know if this was in optical illusion that Hakadosh Baruch Hu made this person see, or actually became filled with gold. But in the eyes of this person, filled with gold coins, it says that this is the koach of Torah. You want to leave this and go become whatever you want to become. That's what you're leaving. It's very much aligned with the Gemara Masechet Shabbat Daf Lamed Gimel. He said, it says, Ozvim Chaye Olam v'oskim b'Chaye Sha'ah. You're leaving Chaye Olam, something that's eternal, something that's so powerful, and you're going to be busy with Chaye Sha'ah, with the finite pleasures and assets of this world. But again, this is to just depict the picture of what the Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli was, different than other people. Before I want to tell you something that's going to blow your hat off. Is this? And the Gemara says also in Sanhedrin, the same Gemara that we have over here, the Aspaklaria Meira, it's also in Sanhedrin Daf Tzadi Zayin. But that really I mentioned because I wanted to tell you what the Gemara says in Tzadi Chet, There the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Levi, Ashkeche le'Eliyahu, de'abakai apitcha de'me'ara. Rabbi Shimon Levi, again speaking about him, he found Eliyahu Navi that was standing by the me'ara of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where perhaps he was buried together with his son, and he says, Amale, atina la'alma da'ati, am I going to be allowed in Olam Haba? I'm going to have Olam Haba. Rabbi Shimon Levi, he had safek whether or not he has Olam Haba. It's a scary thought. And Eliyahu Navi answers him, Amale, im yirtzeh ha'adon hazeh, if this master wants, yes, right? And Amar Rabbi Shimon, this is it's a crazy thing. Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi, Shnaim ra'iti, I saw two people, right? That's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son learning over there. V'kol shlosha shamati, but I heard the voice of three. Rashi there says that this was Shekhinah that was with them and learning Torah with them. At the same time, again, speaking about people who have that, they're Bnei Aliyah, that they have that connection with the Shekhinah. It's not just Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that said it about himself. It is the Gemara that says it about him in multiple other places. I can't believe we ran out of time. There's so much more to say over here. If I could drop a bomb in the last moments before we even get to explain this, I want to read to you two passages from Zohar Kadosh that really takes this to a whole different level. Again, talking about the Gemara, Navi calling him Adon Hazeh, this master. Zohar Kadosh says in Pashat Shemot, in Shemot Pashat Bo, it's like bet of Zohar in Daf Lamed Chet Amud Aleph, when the pasuk says Yira'eh kol zechurcha et penei ha'adon Hashem, that every male Jewish man, should go every one of the Shalosh Regalim to visit HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Man penei ha'adon Hashem, who is penei ha'adon Hashem? Da Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. This is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's one very peculiar Zohar that has to be explained. And the second one is, well, before we even explain this, I'll bring to you another Zohar from Bereshit. I have put here things that I wanted to discuss for explaining these Zohars, but I'm going to skip that due to lack of time. The second Zohar is in Bereshit, in Pashat Vayechi, in Daf Resh Chaf Gimel of Chelik Aleph of Zohar Kadosh, Amud Aleph. Rabbi Abba was the scribe of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was running after Rabbi Shimon the Havarachiv. He was going ahead. He was faster. He was riding. Amar Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba says, this is what the pasuk says in Hosea Perek Yud Aleph. Acharei Hashem yelchu ka'aryeh yishkad. Follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu like a roaring lion. So these are things that we don't find being said about any of the other Tanaim, to my knowledge. And when you speak about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and you see what a big deal is made out of him, not just, again, you learn the Gemara Masechet Succah, like, okay, he said it about himself, but, amazing. And still, the Gemara says saying it. Rav Ashi and Ravina wrote these lines about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but when you expand that and you see what other Gemaras and the Zarkas and Midrashim and Yerushalmis and Bavlis say about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it opens obviously a completely different door to the understanding that one has of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that really opens the door to speak about how in the poskim Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Zohar Kadosh were viewed, and perhaps we'll discuss maybe if time allows. Not just about explanation of these Zohars, but how it is that some of the Achronim did not take Zohar seriously at all, and did not take Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai seriously in that way at all, and what the response to them was, and how history has evolved, viewing Zohar Kadosh versus the Gemara, and how the halacha is dealt with when you have something mentioned in Zohar Kadosh. Is it to be taken halachically serious or not? Be'ezrat Hashem in the next shiur.